A ranger, alone in the African wilderness, collapses without warning. No backup, no radio signal, just silence. But what happens next defies every instinct of the animal kingdom. Out of the shadows, a pair of wild leopards appear, and instead of walking away, they come closer, much closer. What they begin doing leaves even seasoned wildlife experts speechless. This isn't just a story of survival, it's about an unspoken bond between human and beast, and how nature sometimes rewrites its own rules. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring more powerful wildlife stories straight to you. Ranger Miles Carter had always preferred solitude. In his 11 years working the Serenera Valley, he had developed a quiet rhythm, moving through the bush before sunrise, checking for snares, inspecting camera traps, tracking patterns. He knew every scent, every sound. The land spoke to him in subtle ways most people never noticed. But that day, something felt off. The air was unusually dry for early morning. The clouds hung low, and a heat shimmer rolled in quicker than expected. Miles had left the station with just a single canteen and half a protein bar in his pack. He figured it would be a short hike. It wasn't. By noon, the sun was sharp and angry overhead. Miles had covered nearly 10 miles, zigzagging across trails and rocky ridges. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't stopped to rest. A dull throb started at the back of his neck and crept forward like fog. He brushed it off. Fatigue, dehydration. Nothing serious. Until his vision blurred. He paused near a dry creek bed, one boot sinking slightly into the cracked mud. He reached for his radio, but his fingers missed the clip. His knees buckled. A strange, crushing weight wrapped around his chest. Then everything went black. Miles hit the ground hard, face first, his body twisting as he fell. His arm scraped against a sharp rock, drawing a thin line of blood down to his elbow. The radio clattered into the dust several feet away, out of reach. He didn't move. The forest did. 2 leopards. Silent, fluid, golden ghosts of the bush emerged from the underbrush. The first, a full-grown female with pale eyes and a long scar across her shoulder, stepped forward cautiously. Behind her, a younger male followed, likely her son, not yet fully grown, but already powerful. They saw the man lying in the dirt. He wasn't prey, he wasn't a threat. He was something else. Silent, collapsed, unfamiliar, but not dangerous. The mother circled him slowly. Her nose twitched. She crept close enough to touch his boot with her whiskers. Then, in a move that defied every instinct, she lay down beside him. Not to stalk, not to strike, but to stay. The young male approached more boldly. He sniffed at Miles's head, nudged his arm. Then, in a moment that would be hard to believe, if anyone had seen it, he licked the ranger's face. Once. Then again. Miles didn't wake, but something inside him stirred. A whisper of breath, a flicker of presence. And beside him, in the dirt and dust of the wild, the leopards waited. The sun hung lower in the sky now, casting long amber rays across the clearing. A breeze stirred the tall grass, brushing against Ranger Miles Carter's still body. Hours had passed since his collapse, but the 2 leopards had not moved on. They remained. The mother lay curled near his legs, tail flicking occasionally, eyes half closed but alert. Her son paced slowly in small circles, returning often to sniff at Miles's face or chest. He nudged the ranger's shoulder again and again, not playfully, not violently, but persistently, like a cub unsure what to do with a broken thing. And still, no response. Inside the ranger station, no one knew he was missing. He hadn't checked in. The signal from this part of the valley was weak at best, but as the light faded, so did Miles's chances of making it through the night without help, or so it seemed. Because in the golden dusk, the younger leopard did something no one could have predicted. He began to dig. Not with urgency, not like preparing to bury, but slowly, methodically, clearing the ground next to Miles's body, removing sharp stones and sticks. He pushed at the earth with his paws, widened the space, then lay down beside him and pressed against him. For warmth, for comfort, for something neither science nor instinct could fully explain. The mother watched, but did not intervene. She too crept closer, and together the two predators nestled around the unconscious man, their bodies forming a protective crescent in the fading light. And that's when Miles stirred. His hand twitched. A groan escaped his lips, dry and shallow. His eyes fluttered but didn't open. He wasn't awake, not fully, but he was alive, and he was not alone. One of the leopards let out a soft chuff, not a growl, not a warning, but a sound of recognition, of presence. If a camera trap had been aimed just a few degrees to the right, the world might have already seen it. A man, half dead in the wild, being watched over by animals no one would expect to care. But there were no cameras, no witnesses, only the jungle and the predators it kept. As night fell, the wind grew colder. The stars blinked awake above the valley. But beneath them, three bodies lay in the tall grass. Not as hunter and prey, not as enemies, but as something far stranger. Something that even nature didn't quite have a word for yet. Miles opened his eyes just before dawn. At first, all he saw was sky, faint stars vanishing into the lightning blue, and tree branches swaying gently overhead. He blinked. His body ached, his throat was dry, and a dull, pressing weight pinned his legs to the ground. Then he looked down. His breath caught. Two leopards, curled around him like sentries of the night. The younger male lay against his left side, his thick tail draped across Miles's boots. The mother, just inches from his face, lifted her head as his eyes met hers. For one suspended second, the jungle went still. Then, she didn't run. She didn't bare her teeth or vanish into the bush. She simply looked at him, calm, alert, then slowly stood, stretched, and backed a few steps into the tall grass. The younger one hesitated, licked Miles's knee, and then followed. Miles sat up slowly, every joint in his body stiff and sore. His arm was crusted with dried blood from the fall, and his shirt clung to his skin, soaked from sweat and dew. But he was alive, confused, weak, and completely overwhelmed. He scanned the ground around him. No radio, no canteen. His pack had fallen somewhere near the creek bed, out of sight. But what held him in place wasn't panic. It was awe. The prints in the earth told a story. Two large cats had circled him for hours, maybe longer. Their bodies had flattened the grass around his own, and where most would have expected torn flesh or claw marks, there was only stillness. Warmth, protection. Why? He whispered, voice cracked from dryness. There was no answer, of course, but deep in the bush, he saw them, just beyond the clearing. Watching him. They hadn't fled. He stood, swaying on his feet, his legs trembling. The movement startled the younger leopard, who stepped back slightly, but the mother remained still. Miles didn't try to approach. He didn't speak again. He simply lifted his hand, slowly, and placed it over his heart. Thank you. Whether they understood didn't matter. They stayed a few seconds longer, then disappeared into the trees. Later, when he found his radio and called for help, He didn't mention the leopards, not at first. Who would believe it? But as the sun rose, casting golden light across the grass where they had laid beside him all night, he knew what he'd seen, and more importantly, he knew what he'd felt. He hadn't just been watched. He had been saved. By the time the rescue team arrived, the clearing was calm. The scent of the leopards had faded with the morning mist, but their presence still lingered, not in the air, but in Miles's chest. He sat on a rock near the dry creek bed, wrapped in a thermal blanket, sipping water with shaky hands. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke to the medics. "I collapsed," he said. "Heat stroke, maybe. Lost consciousness." "Lucky you woke up before the hyenas found you," one ranger muttered, adjusting the radio pack. Miles didn't respond, because he hadn't woken up alone. He thought of the two leopards, how they had circled him, stayed with him, shielded him from the cold. He thought of the younger one's breath against his face, and the mother's quiet eyes. Back at the station, he mentioned it to Dr. Lana Wu, the senior wildlife biologist at the reserve. She paused, listening carefully. "They didn't harm you?" she asked. "No, they stayed with me. I think they comforted me." Lena didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss it either. "There's precedent," she said thoughtfully. "Not with leopards, but there have been cases. Elephants standing vigil over humans, wolves howling beside fallen hikers. Some animals respond to distress in ways we don't fully understand. But leopards?" She shrugged. "They're solitary, yes, but they're also sentient, sensitive, especially the mothers." Miles nodded, still unsure whether he was telling a story or confessing something sacred. Later that evening, he returned to the clearing alone. Not to investigate, to sit. He found the exact spot where he had fallen. The crushed grass still marked where the leopards had laid. He knelt and touched the earth. "Thank you." He didn't expect them to return. But just before sunset, a rustle in the tall grass made him turn. There, across the field, stood the mother leopard, alone this time. She didn't move toward him, but she didn't flee either. She stood tall and still, her pale eyes watching. He stood slowly, hands at his sides, offering no threat. The distance between them was vast, yet filled with something unspoken. A memory. A bridge. For a brief moment, they remained like that. Two survivors, sharing a glance the wild had no language for. Then she turned and vanished into the dusk. But Miles knew it wasn't the end. Because the wild had not just spared him, it had accepted him. And somewhere deep in the heart of that jungle, a bond had been formed, fragile, wordless, and completely real. 3 days later, Miles sat in the dim glow of the station's control room, eyes fixed on the monitor. The camera traps set along the southern ridge had finally synced with the network, and hours of footage were loading, slowly, frame by frame. He hadn't told anyone what he was hoping to find, but he knew what he needed to see. Click. A blurred still of a buffalo herd. Click. A troop of baboons scrambling up a rock face. Click. And then, there it was. Timestamp. 4:13 a.m. The night heat collapsed. The infrared camera at the far edge of the clearing caught the faint glow of a human body sprawled across the dirt. Miles. And just behind him, two shadows. Spotted. Low to the ground. They moved around him with care, circling twice. The mother lay down first. The younger male stayed close to her, occasionally rising to nudge the man's chest. At one point, the cub laid his head across Miles's legs. Miles leaned forward, heart hammering. There was no aggression, no stalking, just proximity, stillness, contact. Then came the most remarkable frame of all. The mother, eyes glowing in the camera flash, stared directly into the lens. Behind her, Miles's body was partially wrapped by the two animals, like a protective blanket of fur and breath. He sat back in the chair, stunned. He hadn't imagined it. He hadn't misread desperation as kindness. They had stayed. He called Dr. Wu into the room. She watched the footage silently, lips pressed in disbelief. When it ended, she turned to him and said, "You need to share this." He hesitated. With who? With everyone. Later that day, a short clip from the footage was shared on the reserve's social media. No narration, no music. Just 30 seconds of raw, silent truth. A collapsed ranger and two wild leopards keeping vigil. Within hours, the post exploded. Thousands of shares, then millions. Headlines followed. Leopards protect ranger in stunning footage. Predators turned guardians. A real-life miracle in the wild. This ranger collapsed in the jungle. What these leopards did next will break you. People cried. People questioned. Some accused the footage of being fake. Others demanded to know more. But those who had known loss, who had felt helpless and alone in the world, recognized the truth in it. And in ranger stations across Africa, men and women who had always seen animals as symbols of danger or data points or fleeting glimpses now saw them differently, not just as beasts of instinct, but as beings of presence. And for Miles, the story wasn't over, because the leopards hadn't returned since that day. But he felt them, watching, waiting, and soon, something even more extraordinary would bring them back. It was dusk again, almost 2 weeks after the collapse, and the sky had that peculiar orange tint that only came in the late dry season. Miles stood alone at the edge of the clearing, the same clearing where his body had once lain motionless, where two wild leopards had guarded him through the night. The scars on his arm had mostly healed. The bruises had faded, but something inside him had not returned to normal. It had deepened each night since the incident. He came here alone, not with a camera, not with a weapon, just with silence. He didn't come to seek answers. He came to be present, in the same way they had been present for him. The world had moved fast since the video went viral. Media crews had requested interviews. Wildlife experts debated theories on primetime television. Conservation funding doubled for the Serenera Reserve. The story had become a symbol of interspecies connection, of healing, of hope. But to Miles, it wasn't a symbol. It was real, and it wasn't over. That night, as the wind picked up and the trees whispered with dry leaves, Miles heard it again. A rustle, soft, low, deliberate. He didn't move. His heartbeat quickened, but he kept his body still. Eyes forward. Then, through the tall grass, she appeared. The mother leopard. Her movement was slow, steady, unafraid. Her body, lean and powerful, moved with grace as she stepped into the clearing. Behind her, a second form emerged. But it wasn't the adolescent male anymore. It was three small cubs, barely 3 months old, followed at her heels. Their coats rich with rosettes, their steps clumsy and unsure. Miles gasped quietly, hands trembling. She had given birth again, and she had brought them here, to him. The mother approached to within 15 feet, then stopped. The cubs stumbled after her, one of them tripping over a root and tumbling forward in the dust. She didn't look at them. She looked only at Miles. He slowly knelt, eyes soft, heart open. No fear, no barrier. Just presence. The cubs sniffed the air, unsure. One took a hesitant step forward. Another crouched low behind its mother's leg. But the third, the smallest, walked boldly toward Miles. It stopped just a few feet away and sat, Its eyes met his, and in that moment, Miles understood. She wasn't showing him her young to impress or intimidate. She was trusting him, introducing them, acknowledging him not as a stranger, but as something closer. Family. He didn't reach out. He didn't dare. Instead, he lowered his head in a gesture of respect, the way he'd seen trackers honor elephants and lions in ancient stories. The cub turned and padded back to its siblings. Then, slowly, the mother turned, and together the family disappeared into the brush. Miles remained kneeling long after they'd gone, the tears running freely now, not from pain, not even from gratitude, but from something deeper. From witnessing a truth so pure the world still struggles to name it. The next day, he shared nothing with the past, no photos, no statements. This moment wasn't for headlines, it was for him, and for anyone who had ever felt like the world had forgotten them. Because once, in a moment of helplessness, when his body had given out and the jungle should have turned against him, something ancient and beautiful had wrapped itself around him and said, "Not yet. If this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes the wild does more than survive. It forgives, it protects, and it remembers." A leopard didn't see an enemy. She saw a life worth guarding, and in return she gave him something more powerful than fear: trust. If this reminded you that connection can exist beyond words, beyond species, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who believes in quiet miracles. Because somewhere, out there in the silence, a pair of golden eyes might be watching and choosing compassion.